Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Flawless Talk. I am Shelly Allhands with the Flawless Foundation, and this week is Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week. It's a time dedicated to highlighting that while this transition is a beautiful journey for anyone who has just given birth, it can also be one of the loneliest and scariest. So, today to talk about this, we have Fiamma Van Biema, and she is a medical student who is about to be applying for OBGYN residency. But more importantly, she's deeply passionate about the well being of all moms. And I just want to make sure we all know like, we're not here to give medical advice today, but we're here to really have just a real conversation about the struggles that often go unspoken and why this topic of maternal mental health is just as important as any other aspect of a woman's overall health. And a fun fact about Fiamma, she was born to work with new moms, as our founder Janine said. She was actually right by Janine's side when she gave birth many years ago, holding Janine's baby and advising her on what baby gear is actually worth investing in. Fiamma, what was the one you said was popular back in the day?
Back in the day, it was the McLaren.
McLaren. So I wonder if that'll ring any bells with anyone listening today.
Babies of the 2000s. Those were the McLaren babies.
The McLaren babies. All right, so Fiamma, welcome, and I'm so happy to chat with you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Shelley. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so before we dive in, I just kind of want to ask you, we have a flawless question that we like to ask every guest. So for those of you who are new, we start every conversation with the question, how are you really doing? And because so many times we answer it without real meaning and we truly care about how each person is doing, we really want to know. So, Fiamma, how are you really doing today?
So I actually love this question. My brother and I were recently talking about how much we appreciate people who share their challenges just as much as their joys. And I feel like it often feels like challenges in society are not discussed enough or as much as joys. And while I would be more than happy to talk about my challenges, you did catch me at a particularly joyful time, in which it's springtime. I'm surrounded by my family. My family's healthy right now. And, in the afternoon, my brother and I have been going on walks in Riverside Park after his work days and meeting people through their puppies. And
Oh,
it's just given me a lot of joy. So, in mentioning that I'm currently in a joyful phase, I just want to acknowledge that I'm thinking about those who are in a less joyful phase and who may not be feeling their best right now.
I'm glad we caught you at a joyful time.
Thank you. I feel like life is a roller coaster. So you got to
Yes.
ride those joyful moments just as much as those challenges because nothing
Yes.
is eternal.
Absolutely. Yep. I remind myself of that when I'm on like the lows, that I'm like, okay,
Exactly. You're
it's,
like, it's gonna get better.
yep, we're going to go back up. So even when you have your baby and they're around, obviously 24/7, new parenthood can feel incredibly lonely. So I'm curious, why can community be just as important as medical care for mental health?
Community to me and honestly for me is really everything. And I believe especially in times of transition, finding one's community is critical. And the phrase "it takes a village to raise a child" actually dates back to an African proverb. And was grounded in the belief that a community of support, and this is grandparents or neighbors or siblings, is critical to giving children, but honestly, as importantly, their parents, the ability to survive and thrive. And I think that the concept of a village can actually really be broadened to include the school, the community of religious institutions, for instance. And all of these elements can sort of work together as building blocks, in my view, in helping mothers adapt to their evolving roles in this transition. And I
I
think,
I was
no,
just
go
saying, I
ahead.
love the fact that you're talking about community. It's not, I think sometimes we could feel like, oh, I'm not as close to my family or they don't live near me, but all of those different types of community you mentioned, that it can be whatever you need it to be or look like.
Exactly. And you can make it. And I think, unfortunately, in a lot of Western countries, like this villager mentality has often dissipated. And I think nuclear families have become sort of much more insular. Extended families are more scattered.
Mhm.
be it geographically or emotionally. And caring for children has become much more of like a personal parental preoccupation as opposed to a communal one. And not surprisingly, according to authors like Daw et al., who actually published an article in 2025 about trends and disparities in maternal mental and physical health. And he basically says that, not surprisingly, um, with this dissipation of a communal mentality, there's been a concomitant precipitous decline in maternal mental health
Oh my gosh.
between the years of 2016 and 2023. So I'm a big believer in community. I believe that community, and whatever your definition of community may be, is truly really important in motherhood and in life writ large.
So to kind of tie in to like new baby being around all the time, there's a lot of unknowns, especially if you're first of postpartum life, and it can feel very overwhelming. What is one thing you wish every pregnant person knew about the transition to parenthood that might take some of that fear away?
So, I mean, I honestly wish that there was more education and awareness about this often very tumultuous transition that mothers experience. I think women often feel very alone in what they are experiencing in new motherhood. Just to name a few feelings that come to mind, like isolation, a lack of social support, inadequacy, sleep deprivation, body dysmorphia, changes in their relationship with their spouses, with those around them, with their families. And all these feelings kind of creep in. And they oftentimes, at least based on my conversations with new mothers, are meant somewhat feel alone in it. And I really think that efforts should be made to raise awareness about these changes inherent in this transition, to better prepare mothers for it on the
Mm,
one hand, and to sort of help them build a support network in the face of some of the social, emotional, and physical changes that they will experience.
yeah,
And I think that, sort of education at the service of prevention here is one of the resounding themes, I think, in all things, but specifically in the transition to motherhood. I think if there was more awareness that they aren't alone in this, and that some of this is experienced by a plethora of people, it would make them
right.
feel somewhat perhaps less overwhelmed.
Yeah,
That's my hope.
absolutely. The way you just said there, I just had heard about this app, and I can't remember the name right now. Of it's essentially when you were up in the middle of the night, either feeding your baby, trying to rock them to sleep, or change them,
I've
that
heard of
you
this too.
yes, and you basically you just log on or put your little thing there, and you can look at a map and see every other parent that's awake in the middle of the
Yeah,
night. So you can feel like, hey, I'm actually
I'm
not
not
alone.
alone. Yeah, no, I actually heard about this, and I feel like there are some big pros to some of the technological advances in
Yes.
terms of making people feel less alone in the transition.
Yes, because it can feel like, you're 3 a.m. and throws and you're like, what? I'm the only one awake or the only one dealing with
Exactly.
this. And you're not. So, and there's one other thing I've heard of. Is it PEPs? Have you heard of this? It's like a group.
No.
Maybe it's just in a depending on like regional thing, but there's a group that the hospital like you can connect with other moms who gave birth at a similar time, and they will
Oh,
meet
that's so
monthly. Yeah,
cool.
I want to say it's called PEPs, but now I need to
I'm
verify
gonna
that.
look into this. That's
Yeah,
so
so
cool.
it is. Yeah, so you can kind of, and I think it goes through a year. So for the first year, you can all, kind of just stay connected and help. Kind of, you're all
That's
going through
so
the same thing.
nice. Exactly. You're literally going through the same thing at the same time.
Yeah. So maybe that's something. Maybe it's not called PEPs in other places, but maybe that's something else. Everyone could look into.
Yeah, I'm gonna definitely look into that.
You're gonna start the program if it's not there. Okay, so being pregnant right now, I am constantly seeing perfect portrayals of motherhood online. And I will say, while there is definitely a movement to try and, remove that not stigma, but that view of perfection, it is still there. And it can feel very overwhelming and like you're not doing everything right. So for me and all the other pregnant women watching, how could we protect our mental space from that pressure to be perfect before the baby's even here?
So I think this is something that I believe unfortunately plagues us in so many realms of life. And pregnancy and postpartum are no exception. And I think in an era of information overload,
Mhm.
be it from news channels or social media or Instagram, TikTok, and the list goes on, I think we're constantly sort of assaulted by a lot of information. Um, and some of it is good, right? Like what we
Yeah.
were mentioning about like the app where you can log in the middle of the night and see the people that are awake in the middle of the night with you. It's sort of club no sleep type
That's I
um
love that.
type approach. Um, but you basically on these apps, you see a portrayal of a model whose house looks perfect and whose life looks perfect. And I think the natural inclination is to feel like yours is, well, less than.
Mhm.
And I speak for myself here, but when I look at these apps, I try to remind myself that I'm seeing like 1/10, if that, probably 1/100th. And so I also try to surround myself in both real life and on the apps
Uh-huh.
with people that do share the messy in between, because to me, the messy in between is what's actually relatable, and is what makes us all human. And mothers who share the mess, the doubts, the failures, um, are particularly enthralling for me because it's in those moments that I find that there's the most growth. And that you can actually learn from their failures or their challenges. And it sort of goes back to this idea that openness is really rewarding and inspiring in terms of letting other people feel less alone. And I think it's important to have that community that shares challenges so that you
Mhm.
don't feel like you're alone in facing your challenges. And while it may seem perfect, if you uncover that
Yeah.
cloud of perfection, it's really an illusion.
Yeah. I love that. It's an illusion. Yeah. I think that's amazing. I think that's such a good way of looking at it. Um, okay, so can you talk about the statistics around postpartum mental health challenges, which, as we've already kind of discussed, can be quite debilitating?
Yeah, so I'm going to reference a couple of sources here.
Okay.
So, according to the World Health Organization, depression and anxiety during the postpartum period are actually the leading causes of disability in women around the world. And their prevalence is approximately 13% in high income countries and around 20% in low and middle income countries. These numbers are actually from a 2012 review.
Okay.
They're often cited, but that 13% in high income countries is probably now considered a underestimate, and that 20% in low and middle income countries is also considered an underestimate.
That's a
Um,
lot.
that's very high. And while it is quite prevalent, very few women actually, the World Health Organization mentioned about less than 20% of these women that are suffering from mental health, maternal mental health disorders, and report their symptoms. So the effect of these mental health conditions, they note, not only affect the mother, obviously, but that effect permeates to all aspects of the mother's life, affecting the offspring, affecting her support network, affecting her family, her friends, her spouse.
Interesting.
And I think I did do a little bit more research on a state level
Hmm.
because I was curious as to how this would differentiated based on what state you were sorry, excuse me. So on a more US statewide level, there was actually an interesting article that was published by the Policy Center for Maternal Mental Health that delineated maternal mental health risks and resources by
Hmm.
US county.
Oh, wow.
Um, and the various factors which continue to influence maternal mental health. So those are, included but not limited to domestic violence, lack of emotional support, parental unemployment, poverty,
Mhm.
high rates of unintended pregnancy, teen births, preterm births, just struggling with child rearing,
Mhm.
and then finally self-reported poor mental health outcomes. And so in 2023, this organization developed a risk factor score, which was based on 22 measures that had been validated in research that were found to be associated with poor maternal mental health. And what it showed was that between 2023, when their first study was done, and 2025, when their second study was done, the high risk counties in the US actually increased from 700 in 2023 to 796 in 2025.
Oh,
Um, so obviously, more people are struggling.
yeah.
And while they note that between those years, so in those 2 years, the number of providers nearly doubled, only 16% of the US population actually lives in a county with adequate maternal mental health providers.
Did you say 16?
16%.
Oh my gosh.
So I think that, it's important to the reason I wanted to, give some county specific numbers is that I think it's really important to couch this conversation in an acknowledgement of some of the more systemic issues involved here with respect to access and time and just resources.
Hmm.
And while the World Health Organization points to a plethora of people that can aid mothers in their transition to motherhood, be it midwives or family members or visitors or reproductive health and, mental health providers,
Hmm.
um, you have to have the time to see them and you have to be able to access them.
Right.
So I think there are a plethora of systemic issues also at stake in the maternal mental health realm.
So if I'm a partner or a friend and I see a new parent, especially mom struggling, what are some supportive things that I could try to say or do for her?
So I love this question because I'm actually going to reference someone here whose work in the maternal mental health space I greatly admire, Cameron Oakes Rogers, who recently was recognized by various platforms, for a text that she sends out to her friends when they are postpartum.
Hmm.
And I'm going to do a poor job paraphrasing the text, but it's something along the lines of, I am yours from the hours of X to X. I can come over and do your dishes. I can come over and hold your baby so you can go nap. I can do your laundry. I can take your older child out to the park. And she basically sends that text and then they pick an item on that list. And I love this approach because one, it takes away the mental energy required to ask for help.
Hmm.
Two, it has a list of what they may need. And she's a mom herself, so she puts herself in their shoes of remembering what she needed. And of course, like that's not to say that her needs are the same as someone else's needs, but it at least gives them like building blocks
Hmm.
in which they can say, oh, actually, I don't need this. Can you actually do this?
Right.
And it also just is proactive and it doesn't say like, oh, let me know if you need anything. Because
Right.
that feels, at least in my conversations with new moms, that feels like an extra step to have to
Hmm.
think about what you need.
Right.
So this is what comes to mind in terms of support. I think that, this is a great approach because it sort of takes away a little bit of the decision-making fatigue that is involved in having to deal with a new baby and then think about all the things that you may need along the
Hmm.
way. And someone sort of takes that off your plate.
I love that text. I'm gonna use that too for my friends when they're going through that too.
Yeah,
I
you
think.
should check her out. She's very inspirational. She talks a lot about her plight with postpartum depression and anxiety, and has a podcast called Conversations with Cam, in which
Oh,
she interviews people from various walks of life, not only in the maternal mental health space, but oftentimes she does perform interviews in the maternal mental health space.
that sounds like a
And
great resource.
yeah, and I think that she's very real also.
Yeah, I love that. Seems to be the theme here of
Yeah, the theme du
real.
jour. Exactly.
Absolutely. Okay, I have one last question for you about maternal mental health here.
Yes.
If you could tell every struggling new mom just one thing to help her get through a dark day or a tough day, what would it be?
So, um, I think I would tell her to try to take the time before she has a baby to familiarize herself with the concept of matrescence, as I really believe that this knowledge and education about this transition can really help mothers feel less alone, which I've mentioned before. But matrescence was actually a term that was coined in the 1970s by a
Mm.
medical anthropologist, Dana Raphael. And it's basically meant to characterize the transition to motherhood, and meant to explain the social, emotional, cultural, psychological changes that a mother endures during this period of transition. And
Hmm.
I think that in motherhood, we often forget that it is a transition. And Dana Raphael compares matrescence to adolescence. And in
Oh,
adolescence, we give kids a lot of tools to support this transition. And it's a very obvious transition. There are a lot of tools that we offer them to aid in this transition. And she basically says that matrescence is a very similar transition. You know, you you change physically, you change socially, you change emotionally, you change psychologically, and yet a lot of times we don't have the tools to support it. And so I think that just trying to offer women more tools to support this transition would
hmm.
be really helpful. And there are other scholars in this realm, and I'm going to reference Orally Atan, Victoria Trinko, and then Julia Sarewitz, who've noted that if women mothers are given the tools necessary to support the transition to motherhood, it can actually lead to growth, to a clearer understanding of themselves, and ultimately human flourishing for the mother, but also for the baby.
100% believe that. So we have a concept of a flawless world, an ideal type of society. So I'm curious what a flawless world would look to you and what is giving you hope right now.
So, I'm going to answer the second part of that question first, if
Okay,
that's okay.
of course.
So what brings me hope is knowing that whatever one is going through, be it beautiful or be it hard, is not eternal.
Hmm.
And I think when life feels hard, I try to remind myself that whatever is hard is not permanent. And I think that that goes back to what we were mentioning earlier, that I may be in a very joyful time right now. And I don't really want to remind myself that being in a joyful time is not necessarily permanent, but
Right.
it's good to have
Yeah.
some gravitas in that regard and realize that everything is fluid and nothing
Yeah.
is permanent.
And sometimes that can also help you live in the joy more, understanding that.
Exactly. Yeah, capitalize on that joy.
Hmm.
And then with respect to the flawless world, so I've been thinking a lot about the passage of time recently. And that's perhaps because my grandmother is, 106 and a half. And
That's
I've seen
amazing.
I know she's a little rock star. And my parents are getting older.
Hmm.
And I've been thinking about how my definition of a life well lived has evolved as I've gotten older and as I've seen people around me get older.
Hmm.
And I think a past version of me would have chased very different things. And today's version of me hopes to be remembered, sort of when I'm gone, as being a giving person. And so I think a flawless world for me is not the absence of flaws and certainly not the absence of failures, but living the life or your life the way you would want to be remembered, living a life that's kind, generous, forgiving, and I think ultimately genuine.
Love your view on that flawless world. So, Fiamma, I just wanted to thank you for taking time to share your insights with us. And I'm excited that people will get to just see and listen to what you have to share. And hopefully, this will help even just one new mom parent, through this life change.
Well, it was such a pleasure being here, Shelley, and thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and thank you guys all so much for the work that you do at the Flawless Foundation.
Appreciate that.